The Fun Pimps have announced some more perk changes coming in Alpha 21, and these are some significant changes to how we'll be building our melee characters. Before we get into that, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to hit that like button. I promise it's absolutely free. No financial debt will be incurred from pressing that button at all. So if you've been following my Alpha 21 news videos so far, you'll be aware of this first change, but for the benefit of new viewers, let's get it out of the way quickly here. Sexual Tyrannosaurus is being removed, and all of its effects are being transferred directly to the individual melee weapon perks. So now instead of being able to take Sexual Tyrannosaurus to reduce the stamina of all melee weapons, you'll get it inherently from each weapon's specific perk. Now instead of having every single melee build needing to go to strength to get the stamina reduction, you can get it for free with any damage related perk you take, along with minor 69er or salvage operations. For most of us, this change is going to be very good. It's going to make making good builds much faster and mean that we don't necessarily have to touch strength unless we really want to. The next major change is that a version of Flurry of Blows has been added to each attribute in the game, so there'll be a version of Flurry of Blows in Perception which will affect spears, one in Strength which will affect clubs and sledgehammers, one in Fortitude for knuckles, one in Agility for knives of course, and one in Intellect for batons. And yes, this new perk will benefit two-handed weapons like spears and sledgehammers, but not tools. I got that explicit confirmation directly from the Fun Pimps themselves on the forums. So assuming it'll work the same way the perk currently does, that means every melee weapon in the game will have access to a plus 25% swing speed and 30 stamina on kill perk, which is a massive buff to spears and sledgehammers in particular, which were previously completely unaffected by Flurry of Blows. If you didn't know, spears are already going to be receiving a significant buff in Alpha 21, so this serves to make them even more powerful. This change is actually similar to the Sexual Tyrannosaurus one, in that you're going to have to specialise, as no longer can you just take one perk and benefit every melee weapon, but that is a small price to pay for having a much more streamlined and specialised build system. Some of you will hopefully be able to see the really good benefits of these changes, but for those of you who don't, allow me to show you my interpretation of this. When you start off your game, you can pick any melee weapon and all of them will have access to Sexual Tyrannosaurus and Flurry of Blows, without having to spec across several different trees. For example, all builds would previously have to invest into agility to get Flurry of Blows, which meant a lot of investment into trees players may not want anything else from, which made leveling quite dissatisfying in my opinion, and always having to spec into strength for Sexual Tyrannosaurus just meant that realistically, there was no real reason to use anything other than clubs or sledgehammers because you'd be in strength anyway, and then if you did take clubs you would always have to spec into agility at some point for Flurry of Blows if you wanted that, which all just became very repetitive and quite cumbersome. Now you can get your builds up and running much faster. Now all the trees have much more competitive melee builds as they all have access to the same perks, and getting your build up to an effective level is going to be much easier now. This will be most noticeable in my opinion on Fortitude brawling builds. Previously, if you wanted to get say 4 ranks of Brawler, 4 ranks of Sexual Tyrannosaurus and 3 ranks of Flurry of Blows, you would have to spec into 3 different trees, which meant to get this with a brawling build you would need to invest 8 points into 3 trees before even unlocking the final rank of all of those perks. So it would cost you 24 points alone to simply unlock the perks you wanted, and then a further 11 points to actually buy the perks, meaning it would cost you a total of 35 skill points to get a Brawler 4, Sexual Tyrannosaurus 4, and Flurry of Blows 3 Brawler build in Alpha 20, which would come around level 31 assuming you did the tutorial. In Alpha 21, you don't need to spec into strength or agility to achieve this. 8 points into Fortitude, 4 points into Brawler, and 3 points into Flurry of Blows, which comes out to 15 skill points. Counting for tutorial points, that is only level 11. So if you want to rush to level 4 Brawler and get as much stamina and swing speed as possible to just become a really effective fighter, you can do that 20 whole levels sooner in Alpha 21 compared to Alpha 20, because you won't have to invest into 2 different trees just to get 2 different perks. This also applies to Intellect, which previously had a very similar perk spread to Brawler if you wanted to use batons. And even Strength and Agility themselves Blows are going to benefit from this because neither will have to dip into the other. Knives will no longer need strength for Sexual Tyrannosaurus, and clubs will no longer need agility for Flurry of Blows. So overall, your builds are going to be much cheaper to do at the cost of being very specialized into your tree. But since most of us pick a weapon and play with it, it's going to be a flat simplification and streamlining of character building for us. Let's face it though, this change is going to make the game a lot easier. If you can make an effective brawler build 20 levels ahead of where you could in Alpha 20, we have to assume that we're going to be seeing some significant difficulty spikes from the other changes, such as the crafting rework, which we can definitely predict is going to be a lot slower than the current crafting system, and the water rework, which we can definitely tell is going to be a lot harder to get on top of. And we're also going to be seeing a nerf to trading with the removal of the secret stash. We're going to be much more reliant on our personal skills to survive, and that's been made much easier with these perk changes. Whether or not making these builds easier to do is going to be completely and equally balanced out by the crafting overhaul, water overhaul, and secret stash removal will remain to be seen. We don't know the finer details of how this is going to play, so it could be a massive overcorrection in either way. We'll just have to play it to find out. But I do like this particular streamlining choice because it's going to make the previously weaker attributes much more capable of standing alone on higher difficulties, which means I can use a lot more weapons in the long run with a lot more replay value. Now, of course, there was nothing stopping me from using, say, spears or batons in Insane Nightmare, which is the difficulty I prefer to play on. However, whenever you do that in higher difficulties currently, you do feel at a significant disadvantage, and it does feel like artificial difficulty because you could just be using a club and having a much easier time with it. So now that every perk tree is going to have that stamina boost and that swing speed boost, that's going to make all the other weapons much more enticing, especially with the bonus to swing speed on sledgehammers and spears. I don't know about you, but I am really looking forward to trying out a plus 25% swing speed sledgehammer. Another change incoming is a change to the Grease Monkey perk, but in order to really understand the Grease Monkey changes, I should explain the new vehicle changes, so let's start there. Vehicles will now do more damage to blocks, terrain, and enemies. Vehicles will now take more damage from collisions. Bicycles, gyrocopters, and 4x4s are receiving a health buff, and repair kits will now restore a fixed amount of health to vehicles rather than restoring to full health. And each level of Grease Monkey increases the amount of health restored by repair kits by 10%, up to 50%. And we're also going to be seeing spark and blood splatter effects, so that is quite nice. So in case you didn't quite catch what all of that meant, vehicles are basically now going to be able to do damage to the enemies you hit. So presumably we're going to be able to properly run over enemies and drive through walls at sufficient speeds. And vehicles are also going to be much more prone to taking damage, which means that repairing your vehicle is going to be a much more common occurrence. So this is likely another attempt to remove vehicles from Horde Night, and Grease Monkey will restore more vehicle health to save you repair kits. But I don't think this is a particularly good perk effect, given that repair kits aren't exactly expensive or rare, but it is something to keep the perk slightly more relevant after the crafting rework. But honestly, it's not looking good for Grease Monkey. So that was all the news for Alpha 21 this week. What do you think of these changes? I personally really like that further specialization of the attributes, and the vehicle changes are going to be pretty interesting. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to see more Alpha 21 news as it comes out. And check out my last Alpha 21 news video if you want to stay up to date on all the changes so far. And thank you to my channel members and patrons for making this video possible, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.